help us address these concerns moving forward in the next, week to 10 days. We've been working a lot. I know Nick and Haley are tired of hearing from me, seeing me, taking my phone calls, but the three of us really do feel like we have your back when it comes to this ag sector, and we will continue to do that. We don't have all the answers, but we are working very hard to get them for you. So I'd just like to thank Nick and Haley for all the time that they spent as well, and I'm going to turn it over to them.
Well, just to champion what Pete just said there, I think, we, from day one, actually that next morning, we were already receiving phone calls of concern. And we've been relaying, thanks to the director and all the staff at Ohio Department of Agriculture, we've been relaying and have direct conversation with them almost daily if we need to. Every question we get asked, if we don't have an answer, it hasn't been asked before, it's right to them so we can start to get answers. But that's what we need. We need to get some answers. We need to get some data back to understand what we're dealing with here so that all of you can go into the planting season and be confident in what you have there, but also that we have a confidence for our consumers that are out there as well. We want them to know that Columbiana County farmers are still producing great, affordable, healthy foods, and we want to make sure that they have that stamp behind them, and that we can be right there with you to support them. So I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Nick. Thanks, Pete. This is going to sound a lot like what they said, but this past month has been a lot of collaborative efforts between OSU, ODA, Soil and Water, and Farm Bureau. We kind of all are working together because this affects everybody, especially those sitting here in this room. So this is meant to be something where you have the floor here. We want to make this respectful. We want to keep it productive because we're trying to do everything we can with the resources we have available to make sure that this year is still productive for you, that we can answer those questions before we get into that crunch time. And we are in that crunch time of planting season and getting out and grazing and whatnot. So be sure to keep contacting our offices if you have questions, if you have concerns. Pete, Nick, and I are all here to answer those. We have great resources here at the state level as well. So thank you all for coming today, and we'll turn it back over to Rick.
Thank you so much. And just to reiterate, we reached out to, like I said, Farm Bureau, Extension, and Soil and Water, and said, pull some names from the community, pull some farmers from the community, and put it at this table. So most of this meeting is all of this meeting is going to be contained at this table. But we wanted to make sure that we got folks at the table from your community representing the ag area. So as we kick it off just a little bit, as far as where the Department of Ag is at, under the leadership of Governor DeWine. And, real quick, my background, I'm from Southern Ohio. I'm a farmer, farm about 300 acres of corn and beans. From day one, when this has happened, I've kind of woke up in the morning in my small village and put myself in your shoes and asked what would be my questions. What would be my concerns as I'm looking forward to this next crop season, and I'm looking at my corn planter out there and deciding what I'm going to do and so forth. So I trust me, I've looked at it thinking of how maybe the questions that you would be thinking about. So I just want you to know that. I think it's a key part of this as far as we have moved forward in this meeting. As Director of Ag, when this basically occurred, I immediately pulled our team together and said, folks, the Department of Ag touches every corner of the state, whether it's meat inspection, whether it's consumer services, making sure that quality is there for everybody purchasing products. And I said, let's look at this area. Let's see what dairies are in this area, what meat processing facilities, so on and so forth. Making sure that we were focusing on the impact that could happen to the area. And we did that. We've stayed engaged constantly since this has happened. Obviously, we knew that Ohio EPA, US EPA were the lead agencies on these. But as I told our team, we are going to be constantly talking about and preparing for the day that Ohio Department of Ag, again, under the leadership of Governor DeWine, is called up to make sure that our ag community is taken care of and the questions are answered for our ag community. And just to touch on a little bit of what's going on at ag. So really, the only real response that we have dealt with is through our state veterinarian, Dr. Summers, who's sitting here. And I'm going to stop right there and back up a little bit. I want to go around the room and let everybody introduce themselves. I apologize for that. Introduce yourselves, who you're with, where you're from, you're a farmer, what area, and so forth. So I'm going to start right there with Dr. Summers.
Well, thank you all for being here. My name is Dr. Dennis Summers. I'm state veterinarian for Ohio and chief of our animal health division. I'm originally from Muskegon County. I spent about 9 years in private practice as a veterinarian doing mostly food animal work, and I've been with the department now for about 10 years. And super pleased to be here, and hope I can answer any questions you guys might have. So thank you.
Again, I'm Pete Conkle with Soil and Water Conservation District here in Columbia County.
I'm Melissa Witherspoon. I'm with the Ohio EPA. I'm the chief of the Division of Environmental Response and Revitalization. I'm from Fairfield County. Don't farm, but I live around a lot of farming, so I appreciate you all.
Dr. John Patterson, I'm the State Executive Director of the Farm Service Agency, and my home is in Ashtabula County, just a few miles north.
I'm Melissa Smith. I'm Don Parker's daughter. I'm the fourth generation out of the farm, and I'm up here representing.
Todd Stewart, Stewart Brothers Farm. We're from East Palestine, farm about 600 acres of corn beans.
Glenn W. Foster, we run Unity Farms with the East Palestine.
Sam Garian Family Farms. We farm around the Unity, East Palestine, New Waterford area, corn, soybeans, wheat, and barley.
Nevin Van Pelt's fresh produce, raising vegetables to sell to the farm market.
Good afternoon, I'm John Wilson, the state conservationist with the USDA Natural Resources Conservation Service.
I'm Jill Ritchie, Columbiana Mahoning, County Executive Director.
My name is Danielle Birch. I'm here representing the Ohio Farm Bureau. I'm the State District 9 trustee representing Portage, Mahoning, Stark, and Columbiana counties. I am a Columbiana County farmer, born and raised.
Phil Greeneisen, I'm the Public Policy Chairman for Columbiana County Farm Bureau. I also have a farm just right here in Perry Township.
Tom Ritchie, runs the beef cattle of East Palestine.
I'm Kevin Baker, Baker's Golden Dairy, in Waterford. We also grain farm on the side.
Tim Weigel, County Commissioner, directly responsible for the EMA.
Peggy Clark, Columbiana County EMA Director.
Fred Bennett, veterinarian, private practice, Columbiana County.
Bob Black, we have the feed mill in Rogers, and we grain farm around East Palestine and Waterford.
Well, I'm Austin Chamberlain. I'm on the FSA committee for hunting in Columbiana County. I'm also representing my father and my uncle and their business, Chamberlain Farm Meats in Columbiana, Ohio.
I'm Scott Lindsay. I'm the dairy farm in Waterford.
Jeff Hattie, School of Natural Resources and Environmental Science, soil scientist at OSU Extension.
Good afternoon, I'm Mark Durno. I'm with the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency here in Region 5. Grew up in Trumbull County in Champion Township, and I work out of our Cleveland office here in Ohio.
Haley Shoemaker, Columbiana County OSU Extension.
Nick Kennedy, Columbiana County Farm Bureau Director.
I'm Dave Myron. I'm serving as the East Palestine Response Coordinator on behalf of the Ohio Department of Agriculture. And again, just happy to be here.
All right, sorry about leaving that out, but I thought that was important for everybody that's even here, sitting back there, to know that there's a lot of different folks represented from your community in the ag area. So back to where I was at. So Ohio Department of Agriculture, our task so far into this has been mainly with our state vet from the animal response. And just for the record, what we have had so far, we've had 11 species come into the to our state lab, and one was a calf. We had a calf come in, a sample of calf came in, and the others were wildlife, birds, I think a possum or two, and a few other things. And so out of that, we have done necropsies on those, and so far, any of the things that have come into the lab as far as a death, there has been zero signs of any chemical exposure on those animals. The cause of death was not that we said basically there was nothing that was chemical related that we could link to. A lot of different things, but nothing that we could connect with what has occurred here. And that's strictly the facts, is what has come into our lab so far as any toxicities or anything like that. Dr. Summers, like I said, back to what ODA has been doing, immediately was reaching out to local vets in your community, making sure that if folks had questions, if there were signs, symptoms, anything like that of our livestock, there was a pathway through our local vets to make sure those questions were answered. Also, if there were deaths and anything like that. So that response happened very quickly and very, very early on during this incident. A little bit of what ODA, Ohio Department of Agriculture, was involved with. Like I said, we touch every corner of the state. Meat inspections. That is a huge part of one of our big divisions as far as what we do in the Department of Ag. And we have meat inspectors at every site when there is a kill. And to put things, when there's a slaughter, I should say. But to put things in perspective, these inspectors are looking at the animals as far as health, looking at these animals as far as any concerns, and they are trained in this area. And the number one quality is to make sure that there is a safe product to our consumers. And one of the things that they've been out there and they've been looking at, I have to put it in perspective as far as in this area. From the Trumbull, Mahoning, Portage, and Stark County and Columbiana counties, we've had 35, and to put this in perspective. So when a meat inspector sees something that is a concern, then we next go to the next step. And at that point, we bring in a trained veterinarian, and we evaluate what they're seeing. So 35 times state vets, the inspectors have called in vets. 5 cases, those carcasses were kicked out. And none of those were, again, determined from the chemical side of any concerns that way. And to put it in perspective, during this time that I gave you that numbers, there was over 1,000 slaughters within those counties since the derailment. So trying to explain what the Department of Ag has been doing and is doing, and no matter when it is, our quality of our food and its safety is number one. And if an animal is concerned, however it could be, that is not permitted to be in the food chain. And that's why we have such a robust program protecting our communities and our citizens. So from a standpoint as far as where we're, another area that we're heavily engaged with is milk inspection. We have inspectors all over the state dealing with our dairies. Thank you, sir. Where's my dairyman at? Where'd he go? Yeah. Those cows do not take vacations or holidays. I know that for a fact. But they're out. They're out all across our state dealing with our dairies directly. Also dealing with transportation of milk in our bulk carriers. So these folks have been out there on a regular basis throughout. And again, that was another area that we make sure that our inspectors were looking and making sure everything was in place, and we saw no concerns since the time of the derailment. Plant health is a big part of ODA as well. We have a plant pathology and pesticide division, and again, a lot of this work is done at the Ohio Department of Agriculture, but it's also in collaboration with our local folks here, boots on the ground, as they were introduced first right out of the gate. So I wanted to lay the groundwork a little bit of saying what the Department of Ag has been doing so far up until this point, again, under the direction of the governor. And the other thing, we made sure that we were communicating with our friends and neighbors across the state line. We've been on a regular basis doing calls with the Secretary of Ag in Pennsylvania. We talked yesterday on our call with multiple agencies represented. Folks, there is no state line. There might be a state line on the map, but these are friends, neighbors, farms overlap. These are the folks in the community as well. So we wanted to make sure we were in communication with them. So that's been a priority as far as ours as well. Their concerns are the same as what Ohio Department of Ag concerns are, and that's making sure that the ag community is heard. We are there to assist, and at the end of the day, making sure the producers of this area have a safe product. We want to make sure that the economy and the ag industry stays strong. As some folks in the community have a direct sales, or they're putting their livestock or produce into a market. We owe that to the citizens, and that's where, from the standpoint of the Department of Ag, is where we put our priorities. So I think at this time, that was a quick overview. I wanted to touch on a little bit about the Department of Ag and where we're at, what we've been doing. Know that, again, we've been talking about scenarios and what we can do. We can be here to help all of you, making sure that we're there with you, with our partners that are on boots on the ground here in the community. So I guess at this point it's probably a good time. Mark Durno is here and with the US EPA, and I would kind of turn it over to you a little bit as far as where we're at with the USDA, the EPA. I'm sorry about that.
Yep, thanks, Director Baldridge. So what I wanted to do today is just give you a quick update on what US EPA and our partner agencies are doing on the ground with respect to soil sampling, and how that information is going to inform this group on what we can state in the future regarding risk in this situation. So over the past 2 weeks, we've been putting together a pretty comprehensive soil screening plan to evaluate the area of the greater East Palestine area. The area that encompasses a 1 mile radius around the incident location site, and also another area 1 mile further to the southeast of that 1 mile radius. The point of that particular area is, from all the modeling that we've done, all of the dust track work that we've done, and our visual observations on site during the emergency phase of this, we recognized that that was the area that was most impacted by potential ash and soot that might have released from the fire itself. So from that assessment area, we're planning to collect in the neighborhood of up to 300 samples beginning today to assess that area, to determine whether or not we have any increased risk in the area. And I'll tell you in a minute about what compounds we're sampling for. Recognizing that there are two key areas, land areas, that are of highest priority at this point, just because of timing, and the director mentioned this earlier: agriculture and recreational areas. The kids are going to get out, start playing sports here very shortly, and you need more information on the health of soil and how it relates to your crops. So again, as soon as this afternoon and tomorrow morning, we'll be out collecting samples. I mentioned that the number of properties we may be sampling is up to 300. That's going to depend on whether or not we actually visually observe ash or soot. If we don't, the number of samples will be a lot less. It could be as low as 60 properties. We want to sample worst case conditions. Again, if we see ash or soot, we will collect an individual discrete sample of that ash. If we don't, we'll collect a sample of the top 1 inch of soil to determine if soil has been impacted. In both of those scenarios, we will also collect a second sample from 1 to 6 inches beneath the ground. So we are also looking, again, worst case scenarios. So we're not going to be sampling in areas that have heavy tree cover, for example. We want to assess the areas where ash may have landed, and we can get an accurate result from the impending analysis. The analysis will include semi-volatile organics, which are the breakdown products of the burn of the organic material. And we're also sampling for dioxins and furans. Typically, we wouldn't do this. The science does not suggest that we have a dioxin problem from this incident. However, we've heard very expressly from our local leaders and from the community that they would like dioxins as part of our analysis. So dioxins and furans will be analyzed for with this effort. Again, sampling will start tomorrow. We're prioritizing ag and rec locations. We should start seeing preliminary data come in 7 to 12 days. And again, I want to reiterate that the most important piece of this is to inform not just residential, commercial, recreational properties, but all land users on the most heavily impacted area, what the footprint of contamination might look like. Again, we don't believe that there have been significant impacts that would increase risk, but we can't make that determination unless we have data behind us to make those conclusions. So unless there's questions, we'll get into that portion. I can touch on that later.
Yeah, and while we're at this point, I'm okay with, if you have a question, let's go ahead and have that dialogue as far as the question if you come to.
My question is that you mentioned that you're most concerned. Did I hear correct? You said southeast?
Correct.
Okay, was that from the original impact of the train derailment with the plume, or is that from the actual controlled burn?
So it's both. We recognize the winds were shifting, and we know that from southeast all the way up to northeast was impacted to some extent. But this initial sampling event, and this isn't the only sampling we're going to do. We wanted to nail down the areas that were most likely impacted by both the fire and the controlled burn.
I took a photo, went viral, you've probably seen it, it has the barn inside with the plume. That went at an angle over our farm.
But now I'm guessing you're northeast?
We will be directly southeast of the site, and it's about 3/4 of a mile.
Okay.
The north end of it. And we've yet to have anybody show up to do water testing, so I did it independently. But we have been told that someone is going to come and do some soil sampling. So yeah, those are concerns for us with, when you get ready to go and the alfalfa starts coming up the planting, what are we dealing with? Do we have additional contamination we should be concerned about?
Understood. And again, that's the reason. And I know that there was concern about the timing of all this. Why didn't we do it 2-3 weeks ago? We were at the outset. We were in life safety monitoring and sampling, and we were doing some analyses right around the site itself. We issued, as you probably know, we issued an order to the company to develop these plans and implement these plans. Their contractors will be collecting the samples. We will be providing direct oversight of that. It won't just be the company itself.
We've seen the maps. They have maps that are out for like the well testing, and they've literally got a pink, they have the rectangle of this is the one area, and they have another rectangle that goes south. It completely avoids ours. And I feel like we're considerably close. We have a lot of land involved. So I think it would be beneficial to definitely have at least the soil testing for some, you feel a little more confident. But the cattle themselves, everybody keeps asking, our cattle contaminated.
Understood.
Yeah, they're fine.
Okay, and then so I did bring a couple copies of the area that we are going to be collecting samples in. Feel free to grab a couple of these. They're also the full plan, including the map, is on our website. Just Google EPA East Palestine train derailment, and you'll find our soil sampling plan. Again, I only have 4 copies, so whoever wants to get them. But again, you can see that whole plan online. Look at the first 8 pages for those who want to read it. Everything behind it, the 117 pages, that's all quality control, lab procedures, things like that. But the first 8 pages clearly describes what we're doing.
Good.
Thank you. Mark, just a couple of quick questions, 2 of them to allay any fears that might have bubbled up since we had our meeting the other day. Number 1, when our property owners, they'll be notified, who will they see actually show up at their site?
Yeah. So there were the teams on the ground are a combination of contractors, Norfolk Southern contractors, our contractors. We do have some of your staff North Patterson that are involved in this, and there may be some other another state personnel assisting us either from ODA or Ohio EPA. In some cases, you'll have some of our response coordinators along on those inspections as well. And so again, I say inspection. The inspection part of it is we're looking for ash or soot that deposited from the fire. And that's where you all can help us. If you know of areas where there has been some deposit of ash or soot that are still there, we know we've had a lot of weather events since that incident occurred. But if you are aware, make us aware of it, and we can target those locations.
And a follow-up, if I may. They will be contacted first.
So,
right?
It may be door knocking, right? So we may have, this afternoon,
We're going to be working on that.
Yeah.
And finally, for our folks there, the tests are going to an independent lab, are they not?
Correct. And we're also going to be splitting a number of the samples from the railroad contractor to verify the accuracy of that data. And those will go to even a different independent lab. And we also have an on-site lab, a US EPA on-site lab that we're going to be screening some of those samples at as well. So it's kind of a three-peak quality assurance program.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I think you're going to ask a question about what it's not.
No, I was going to ask, when you do get results, when and I guess, when are you going to, and where are you going to show the results to everyone?
So, the partners at this table, we'll make those, we'll give you an indication on preliminary results right away. So I would ask, we don't have the relationships with you that our partners do, so when we feed you information, I assume you'll get information out to the community. So, and we'll also be posting our results on our website and some of our partners' websites as well. But again, the key for you is knowing who to get it from, right? And that's why I would turn to our ODA partners to advise on that.
I think Bob and Austin, I think they were going to ask a question. I helped on what they're talking, but
can you pass them maps around?
Yeah, sure.
And look at them?
Yeah.
Pass one each way or something. Yeah. The other thing is, you realize it's been a month and it's been raining. I'm not sure how you're going to find any ash now.
We totally get that.
So what do you?
So that's where there's two sampling approaches, right? The first is.
But if you're not going to sample where you don't find ash,
it's random. It's going to be a random location on properties that we assess.
So I guess as a follow-up to that question that Bob was asking, you said the potential of 300 sites, up to 300, right? But it could be as low as 60. And that's not determinant of possible owners. It's not 300 owners, right? It's 300 samples from across that collection category.
300 properties, right.
Okay, and so again, a month later, we're looking for ash deposits.
Correct, if they're there.
If they're there. And if they're not there, we're just minimizing, or limiting ourselves to only 60 samples.
Yeah, 20% to give us that initial snapshot. Now, and it's an initial snapshot over that, 2 square mile area. And if we see any problems, if we see any hits, contamination profile hits, that could give us information or suggest that we may need to do some more in-depth investigation.
I see. So this is just the preliminary run.
First screen.
That will hopefully identify areas which are more difficult or harder hit or need more assistance.
And what we would expect, again, some of the commercial properties right around the incident site, we would expect to see, some level of semi-volatile organic contamination. It's an industrial area right there, not on the residential side, but on the commercial side, so we'd expect to see some of that.
Okay.
But once we get further away from the site, our hope is that we don't see anything about background. And so we can, that helps advise all landowners on, what the health of that soil is. So, so stay tuned.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Kirk.
You're welcome.
I think I wanted to follow up. It's a good time to mention your question about current growing season. We know the wheat's greening up. We know alfalfa is coming out of dormant stages. Our hay and so forth is getting ready. Cows are going to be out enjoying the fresh green grass. From a standpoint of Ohio Department of Ag, the folks are specialized folks, and we have put together a great partnership with Ohio State and their scientists. We are excited about that and getting a lot of questions answered in the ag community as we move into this in different phases, and we look at the spring growth, and then we look into planting season and so forth. So know that the folks that are much more knowledgeable on that specialized scientist mentality, that is set up. We're communicating, the team is together, and we're going to be working on that to let those folks really ask the hard questions, and then we can go from there. Where does that take us in the ag community in a direction, asking some of the unknown questions as we move past soil and water. So know that that's in place as well.
But I'm not aware, is it Scott or Kevin that leases crop, to grow crops over across the state line?
Yeah.
Yeah, those would be the things I'd be concerned about, is like what you're growing there and what you can bring back.
And we have the property owner there at the corner of East Palestine and Valley Road. And we found paint chips, what they're doing to the paint chips for over the tanker. So those are there.
Yeah, we got a report from, it was also a Pennsylvania resident, of some small metal shavings that were very close to the derailment site that probably did very, very light, very fine. And we did get over there and collect samples. Don't have the analysis from that yet. But so yeah, there's actual solid material. That's one thing, right? Like paint. The general action silt from the vinyl chloride and acrylate burn, that's another one. So really, two separate sampling needs.
I think it's interesting that as I think about it, and I think it's a priority to make sure that we reiterate, is that if nothing found, there's going to be less testing, but as soon as one of those tests comes back, that causes a question mark, then that increases the testing.
It could be, yeah. And again, the contaminants that we're looking at, Director, the semi-volatile organics, those are very common chemicals. If you had a small oil leak out of a piece of equipment, you might see some semi-volatile organics, right? So they're kind of ubiquitous. I hate to use that word, but it's the word we use. In the environment, we see it everywhere. But again, are they at levels of concern? That's the question.
More questions?
I guess, when you're talking about your testing, you had the map. As far as the U.S. Department of Treasury, are you also going to be testing that ground? Are you testing that ground over in Pennsylvania also?
Yeah, most of the 2-mile range, if you look at the map, that's just about all.
And you're going to be testing in that area also. And that will be like for Scott or whoever would have property over that, we can be able to then.
Yeah.
Okay.
There's been rye, I brought it up the other day, cover crops. That's been out there. Triticale is the main thing that dairy farmers use for forage early spring, rye, and there's also wheat. How come we're not, if you're talking dirt, how come we're not testing the plant?
Yeah, so that's some of the, there you go.
Yeah, I think that's what I was alluding to, as we've teamed up, the Ohio Department of Agriculture has teamed up with OSU, Ohio State University, and brought those scientists together. How are we going to make sure that plant that's going into that dairy cow and that's producing milk, all those dots are connected, and we're evaluating, what could be the impact. So that is the reason the collaboration between ODA and OSU is critical at this point. Thinking about that exact scenario of what you placed, what you put in place. This is the beginning, is the soil. It's what we've all been waiting on from the ag community. And then as we move forward, we get into those forages and the uptake and what the cow.
So you will test for the plants that are already there that come through with the ash and the fog that went over top of it. I mean, the wheat, the rye, was out of dormancy when this all took place.
Right.
So it wasn't just sitting there. I mean, there's a very large plant on our rye that stuff can collect. I'd say it's going to hit the rye before it'll even contact with the ground. Mine's 6 inches tall. I'm not in the danger zone, I'm west, I'm just looking at the other people that could have something like that out there. I talked to another lab, and I ain't gonna say any more about it. They were more concerned of testing for the grasses, if we had something on it, than they were the dirt.
And back to that point, I mean, it's a priority of ours with our team at ODA. This is the conversations that we are having with our meat folks, our plant pathology folks, ODA, Ohio State, making sure that we're figuring out, what happens with that uptake, what happens with that milk production within that cow, or whatever, beef cow, lambs, whatever. That's the questions that we're in the process of putting that plan together to make sure those folks and there's a plan in that space. So I agree 100%.
I mean, we're 2 months away. I mean,
Absolutely.
Do you have
We got
a
rolled.
date when that's going to happen?
We do not.
That's what I was gonna ask.
Yeah, absolutely. And this was recently that we finally got together with that collaboration. Because the hard question is, this is not a normal test, so it wasn't a regular. I mean, as a farmer and my farm, this is not a test I could, immediately just answer those questions to. So that it is not in place yet, but it is 100% a priority of the Department of Ag. Because this is all part of the ag.
But you don't have any timeline of when it will be?
I cannot put a timeline on that. No, I will put my name on that and say it is a top priority, that we are going to do our quickest and best to put that in place.
I'd like to just interject. I mean, up until a week, 10 days ago, the triticale, the rye, and weeds, and barley really wasn't on anybody's radar, even though Haley, myself, and Nick, until Director Baldridge stepped in and provided some leadership, it was not on people's radar. And that's been my biggest concern all along is we're starting to see that lack in consumer confidence because of the products that may be coming out of that valley. We need to assure everyone that what's being ingested by that livestock is safe. And so, thanks to Director Baldridge and his team, they're now making it a priority to get these tests developed. Because when we first started talking about it, nobody had any idea of what we needed or how to go about it. So I know it's not the answers that you guys wanted to hear as far as how soon, but at least it's in the mindset and we're working towards it.
So will producers have the ability, like, is it going to be an issue if someone takes cattle to the sale, wants to sell hay or round bales or whatever? Is that going to be an issue moving forward for anybody who's with sales? Or are they going to be required some kind of documentation to prove anything?
So obviously, from my standpoint as Director of Ag, that's been my concern all along, the impact to our ag community and that economy. Because, all of a sudden, question mark. What does that do to a market? Pushes down the market. So that's a tremendous concern, and that's why it has to be our priority to make sure that we can, with confidence, say, yes, it's safe. And that's our goal, is to say, yes, we want to put that in place. It's probably a good transition. I don't know, Dr. Hattie, if you want to, from OSU, if you want to input anything on this as well, as we have these conversations.
Yeah, I would say just from a perspective of looking at there's a lot of compounds that were involved after the materials burned, as Mark knows and kind of alluded to. So it's hard to pinpoint an exact specific compound because each one of them will act different, even within different plant materials. So we do need to know on the plant side of things, and that's probably something that we need to have in place of what plant uptake to provide you the knowledge that you can provide to your consumers about your products. So those are important things. I actually was.
Can you speak a little louder, please?
Yes, I was actually part of the team that reviewed the soil sampling, and so we had some comment and input of our experiences relative to collecting samples and what might need to be there. And so those were certainly taken into consideration as EPA approved the plan. So we have had some input in that, and we are looking at what are the issues that you need to be aware of.
Yes, sir.
Will there be the availability to test the grain? Say we combine June, July. How do we know that that grain is safe? Can we test the grain itself even if we didn't find anything in the soil? some of our customers, some of that is, some of what we grow is, goes right to human consumption. Can the grain be tested for some of that, or, some of our samples get sent out to different colleges, get tested for things that we're looking for, but they're not gonna test for, that kind of stuff.
Agree wholeheartedly, and that's why, and I'm going to go back to, I think it's a priority to make sure we look at it, that truly the sciences. We want to know how far and what can we test for, and again, to come back with a message that, the production, wherever that production is safe, safe for the markets. It doesn't have a negative impact on the markets, and that. So, yeah, we got a hybrid seed corn business, and we did a lot of specialty on silage corn. I mean, there are a lot of tests out there, but to the point when we get into a specialized area, that's what makes it harder, and that's why we've teamed up with OSU to put those scientists in place and really had that good conversation. How do we come up with an answer to the test? Yes, sir.
Was thinking about testing. I'm seeing 3 different tests. One for the soil, correct? One for the plants, one for the milk. And I'm thinking, and would like to know, for my own edification, have those tests been developed? And secondly, supporting that, do we have the capacity to run those tests and get results back quick enough to make some concrete decisions when those moments arise?
And I'll speak to it a little bit. I mean, as far as ODA and OSU, the capacity is not there. It's not within the realm of ODA, and I've spoken to Dean, and it's not within the realm of OSU. So these are tests, once we isolate our plans on that, when we get into these different crops and these different sectors, then obviously, we put the folks together to make sure that we understand what we're looking for, and then it goes into the private sector, finding that lab that can do these tests. And then making sure we're collaborating and make sure that, that these are paid for by the folks, that obviously are responsible for the incident.
And that's where I was going with that. If we need additional help, perhaps through USDA, we can marshal our resources to come alongside to provide the capacity and the funding potential.
Yeah, these analyses are developed in Mark's well aware of this. There are a number of labs throughout Ohio and Pennsylvania who are certified in EPA protocols, and so it's really important that as you look for a lab to do any analysis, that it is an EPA certified lab using the EPA methodology, and that's critical in any testing that you do for, and there's no universal method. So again, you need to know exactly what you're testing for, and that they're using the EPA method for that compound or compounds that are being analyzed. All right.
I guess my question, maybe I'm not, I'll go anybody else. My question is, you said you know exactly what you're testing for. Do we know what exactly we should be testing for?
Yeah, as I mentioned earlier, sir, the primary breakdown products that from the chemical were phosgene and vinyl chloride. Not vinyl chloride, sorry, hydrogen chloride. And those compounds dissipate relatively quickly. We saw very low levels of those. Okay. The secondary compounds are the semi-volatile organic hydrocarbons, which would be in that ash and soot. That's what we would expect to see lingering longer term, if it's ever. And again, we're also sampling for dioxins and furans out of an abundance of caution. But it's the semi-volatile organics. It's going to be the indicator as to whether or not we have an issue. So, could there be extremely low levels of hydrogen chloride still present? Probably not with all the rain we had. But I can't rule out anything. But it wouldn't be at any levels to be of concern.
I think John, also on the testing, the Department of Ag and Ohio State just don't have
the turnaround times, the flow capacity to do the number of samples that might be required. And so that's why we would encourage folks to use the labs that have been certified by EPA.
And if we could put a list out, then we would be more than happy to put those in our offices so that folks would have that and post them on the website. I think we'd love to do.
I believe that there's a fairly comprehensive list at Ohio State Water Resources Center, and they have a fairly comprehensive list of private labs throughout Ohio. I can share that link with you.
Just on the dairy side, testing of milk. I know we're talking about soil and growing crops, but products leave in the driveway every day and have been. If we find something now, who's liable for this? Because of lack of testing or any testing. Now, this milk is for cheese plant. Cheese plant is national, or if not international, processors of product. It's out there, it's been out there for 30 days.
And to the point, I mean, it's a good question. I hear you when you say that, and that's a question that, unfortunately, no offense to hopefully there's lawyers sitting at the table, but that's going to be up to the lawyers.
Yeah.
And you are with the inspection that goes on from the Department of Agriculture within your business. We know that everything is done properly, up to date. That's the information that we can go with today. And again, that, all these different tests and the conversations that we're going to have with our collaboration, we want to make sure that we're evaluating that. And to that point, as that dairy cow, I think obviously was mentioned, as a dairy cow eats that grass, eats that lagoon, eats that spring growth.
Right. But there have been dairies, especially to the east, and farms were closed. Did they inhale? Is anything going to be traceable? I don't know if that's a mode of action.
I'm going to turn that over to Dr. Summers to just talk about it.
Yeah, so you would think that if you had acute high doses of exposure in that amount of time, you would start to see multiple animals affected simultaneously, right? I have not gotten reports, whether it's from PA or Ohio areas, in any of the contacts that I've had since the derailment at all, of large numbers of livestock that have been affected through clinical science or death. In this sort of epidemic proportion, right? So if you had an entire barn full, it would be normal to expect, perhaps some coughing and running eyes for a short amount of time.
Even the folks I know that had barns full are saying no side effects whatsoever.
And sir, that would be 100% accurate to what I'm getting out. Again, a few cases here and there, but there's lots of reasons why livestock would be coughing, in the winter time, right? So there's other things that can cause it. There's been nothing since the derailment, any evidence to support in any way right now that our food safety system is compromised. And I 100% mean that. There's been no evidence of that. Even though we've had a few limited necropsy samples come in, we're looking for signs of chemical exposure in terms of respiratory irritation, anything that would show that. None of those samples that have come in have seen it. And I've talked to dozens of veterinarians and producers in Columbiana County, and no one's reporting it. The other thing too is we have reached out to the Food and Drug Administration just to start these conversations about the opportunities to test milk and or eggs specifically. And that was a fruitful conversation, but we don't have any definitive answers yet, but we're engaged with those conversations because we realize that needs to be tested. It's a readily consumable product. You're consuming it right now. So we need to make sure that we have the answers you guys are looking for. So we have engaged in this conversation as well.
I think it would be good to have some direction for some of the small-time people that have like an acre of ground, that have chickens, that like to take products to farmers markets. They're asking questions like how long is it a good delay as we consider safe? Those kinds of questions that would be helpful for the community members. There's social media is kind of like the sore spot because there's so much disinformation floating around on there, and that's where it's getting spread about how dropping and all of these rumors that are just what's happening.
Well, I again, I'm not getting information that's coming down here. Most veterinarians in Ohio know that if they run into something that goes outside of the normal things that they would see, they know to call me.
Right.
And I'm not getting those calls. I do agree with you, much of that information is either mis or disinformation that's being put out. We just are not seeing it. Now, I do want to address the birds, because they are a different species than other livestock. So, again, I've reached out to our poultry association. We've got broiler operations here. We've got backyard bird flocks up here. Again, I'm not getting reports of those large numbers of sick birds. A sick bird this time of the year, to be quite honest, I'm more concerned about avian influenza than I am, vinyl chloride exposure. Just because, again, if you're going to see it, a bird species is more likely to show a clinical sign before another livestock because of the way their respiratory system works. So you'd be more apt to see it. I haven't got any of those reports. A sick bird here, a sick bird there, sure, we get those. But not on that large scale that you would expect with this kind of incident. If somebody does have a sick animal, for any reason, they need to be contacting their local veterinarian to get first round care. And then from that point, we can have conversations with things that's not. But
We haven't heard of anyone on here.
no, I'll be 100% honest, man. I'm just not getting the reports.
We have a local vet, Dr. Bennett, do you want to?
We have seen 0 cases of illness in any of our patients owned by our clients.
And I'm sure you've had numerous, I'm sure the calls have probably been quite a few, as far as just questions from the ag community, man.
From the media, not from,
Okay.
because I'm saying, we've had 0 cases.
And I'm going to make a statement about the ag community. I mean, I know my livestock at home. Now, my brother-in-law knows it better because he's there every night. But you're around your livestock. You know your livestock. You respond when you notice something that is abnormal and so forth. I mean, that's as a business owner, as farmers. I mean, we've got to keep a close eye on it because. So I think that I just want to make that statement. Knowing when you're growing crops, you got to respond to issues in crop production that affects the crop season and/or the livestock as well. So I appreciate the ag community from my standpoint.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Question for you. You mentioned that birds would be affected first, right?
It would make sense to me that birds would be a more susceptible species on the front end.
And here's why I mentioned that. At our meeting the other day, there was a farmer who, and I forget, was he in PA?
It's actually, this is the dollars right here. The
blackbirds. The blackbirds in the barn. Your dad was hoping that the smoke and the inhalation would kill the blackbirds.
I don't think that was us. Was that you?
There it is.
Giving something to get rid of blackbirds.
And it didn't happen. It didn't happen, and so I suggested that perhaps, with your permission, we could take some samples from those birds, potentially, because they would have been at roost. The smoke would have been contained, heavily contained, in where they would be perching.
We don't, and honestly, we had a cardinal who's been pecking our back window for 4 months. I mean, nonstop. And he left when this all happened for about 2 days. And he's back. He didn't know anything.
I just thought that might.
No, and I heard that, and I'm glad you said it, because I think that would be, again, those would have been, you would have been more likely to see these kinds of trends in livestock and birds in the acute phase in really high doses. I do want to also mention, just to piggyback on something the director mentioned earlier, just to again show the breadth of the work that we've done in animal health. Is, you all have significant livestock market right outside of East Palestine, so Rogers Auction. So we have inspectors out there that are there at the auction sale. We've talked to them. We've made them aware of what to look for that would be consistent with chemical exposure. No reports.
And what would that be, specifically?
So you're most, again, in the acute phase, you'd be most likely to see upper respiratory irritation, watery reddened eyes, kinds of the same symptoms you would most likely see for humans. The skin could be different in terms of the skin manifestations of irritation because they have a bigger hide, they've got a little more hair. You may or may not see that, but we're asking them to look for the signs of animals that are showing signs of excessive frothing of the mouth, anything like, and even if they saw that, that would trigger us to take some action that is probably a different related disease or response. But we've said, hey, be actively looking for those. We're not getting any of those reports that are outside of normal. The other thing too is we have to get out, to our meat inspection division. So again, I just want to echo that is a really valuable tool to getting observations of livestock. So when they go into plants, state inspector plants specifically, like the Chamberlains, those inspectors are looking for animals that have signs of illness. And if they are, they're held back. There's a process to go through there. We've asked them to look for those very same specific signs, and we're not getting reports back. So we are slaughtering healthy livestock. Chamberlains are not going to slaughter unhealthy or unfit animals for human consumption. So again, there's a lot of misinformation about that.
The inspector, is presented for inspection. Inspection takes care of, okay, we got to look at plans, we got to look at the whole thing. And if anything is in question, a vet in the district is called, he shows up, it either gets condemned or passes, either or. And mainly, I guess as a whole, most of the people in the area, we understand that, okay, we're good. Our cattle are good, our product is good. The problem is just conveying that message to everyone else. Because communication has sucked. To put it in perspective.
Lindsay has, 1,000 cows?
800 or so.
Yeah, I
200
mean,
cows.
looking at many cows, and, I can just see right now, the people on social media, he's so close to the town, making a big deal, oh, it's dairy, I get it, it's concerning, the lack of communication showing that it's not a problem.
And even some of that, we've tried to track down some of that social media from our, it's concerning for me and our department as we see that as well. And I know it concerns you folks as folks living in the community. It's concerning to us, and it's like, did this happen? And we've tried to track down on our end as well.
The people who spread the falsehoods are just way louder than the people spreading truth. That's the problem. They're getting more attention.
I was just going to say, is there other questions or?
So along those lines, obviously we have those farms that are directly impacted in that zone, the map that went around there, but those that are outside of that zone that are getting those phone calls, those direct to market consumers, what can they get to help them go back to their customer base to say we have access to the same test, we've taken that same test, or we're going to get the opportunity to take that same test, so they can, in a sense, turn back to their customers and say there's nothing wrong. Will they have that access? Because obviously, when the plume happened and the burn-off happened, there were reports in Mahoney and County as well that just said, hey, we smell something in the air. So there's just automatic concern there. So, if they have some of the culinary anxiety to say, hey, I've done that test too, that soil test, that water test, that milk test, that, I feel confident that we're good to go.
And I think, I think the key is this beginning, the soil test, and again, I think everybody was ready for it quite a while ago, but to your point, life safety is first. I did a career as a fire medic. I get it, you have to prioritize and triage, but we are definitely to the point now. And I think the initial plan, there's going to be decisions made of those results of the initial plan, because if they come back negative, that's one aspect. But if there's things that we see, then it's going to trigger, that triggers a lot more. And I think we have to look at that, where that initial plan is at, and anxiously waiting that information. I think it's key as we move forward in this together as a community.
No concern for water? Is that?
Yeah, so, great question, ma'am.
So on the waterfront, so Ohio EPA has been working with Columbia County and working on drinking water wells and municipal wells, right? And they collected samples. I think they're up to 200 private wells now, and plus you have the municipal wells. That are all showing nothing of concern from the analysis that we got. They're also, and correct me if I'm wrong, but they've also established some monitoring wells around the derailment site to monitor groundwater quality. That's groundwater. Surface water. I hope they're not drinking out of Sulphur Run, because it's still contaminated. Okay, so Sulphur Run is still being worked on by the Norfolk Southern crews, overseen and worked on by Ohio EPA. Leslie Run, there's still some work that needs to be done in Leslie Run. It's starting to clear up, but it's still contaminated. Okay, in certain portions of it. Ponds and pools are, the soil information that we collect will inform greatly on ponds and pools, because again, if we're not seeing contamination of soil, which will hold it, the likelihood of us seeing it in water sources is low. Now, we are developing, the soil plan was put actually out ahead of our full, what we call a full removal plan, which includes a number of other testing of environmental multimedia, including surface waters and ponds and so forth. So we're going to be doing more of that work, but we want to get this soil plan out before we even put out the full removal plan, because we've heard that it's such a key priority. So that's why we're on that. But again, I think this initial soil plan, as the director stated, is going to really inform us on some critical next steps.
The gentleman caught me earlier before we started, and this is a question for you, and it's my curiosity as well. But from a standpoint of as wells and so forth, is that if there is contaminant and it leaches through our soils into those wells, and I guess the answer to that is continual testing.
Yep.
So I guess just
So according, again, I'm speaking for Ohio EPA and Columbia County, but there is a testing protocol being put in place to do more testing than they typically would do. It sounds pretty strong regimented program. Again, they can provide more information on number and frequency of tests, but they've committed to keeping that going long term. So again, I can't give you numbers because I don't know them off the top of my head, but I do know it's an expansive program.
Director, I'd like to point out that Mark has extensive experience with water. You want to share with them in your previous...
Flint?
Yep.
Yeah, we spent a year and a half in Flint working on every water crisis.
We were fortunate to have him. And one quick question, if I may. Our farm folks, good about keeping records. What sort of records ought they be collecting? What should they be looking for to build a case if something is found later? Just a general question. Does that make sense in terms of being proactive? And I ask that of anybody.
I'll kick that off. I guess my thoughts are, again, I'll put my work boots on and think what I would be doing if this was happening at my farm. I think documentation. You got to document one, when you're selling livestock, if you feel like there's a negative impact to the market. You got to document, your production, your production. I think you just document everything. We don't know if this is going to be long and drawn out, but I think the key is documenting your operations of everything you're doing right now. I know that adds to it, but I think it's critical. Just to make sure when those questions are asked later on, as we get back to a hopefully sooner than normal. But I think you just make sure that every chance you get, you're documenting, and you're keeping track of all your documents, and your time stamp and so forth. I think it's important to the business model moving ahead for your own profession. And that's looking at in my shoes as far as what I would think I would be doing.
So, sorry, were you pointing it? Did I jump in there? That was my bad.
Yeah, please.
today, the Senate Transportation Committee held their hearing, and we saw the Ohio senators and the Pennsylvania senators sit in front of them and talk about what they wanted. And then they brought in the CEO of Norfolk Southern and EPA directors and those types of things, and a long conversation was had. In my spare time, I teach government, so I took that opportunity to watch the entire hearing. It's class edification, okay? But while we were watching it, a couple questions kind of came to me as they were talking about the cleanup efforts that Norfolk is doing there at the crash site. So I'm hoping that you can kind of maybe clear up or just tell from a local perspective what we're seeing with the cleanup. So it's my understanding that after the derailment, and I know it's important to get the trains moving again, that the soil wasn't necessarily removed quickly, and then the rocks were brought in, and that was also placed on top of the contaminated soil. And the claim by Senator Vance was that there are piles of contaminated dirt that have not yet been removed because, just like the soil testing, these types of things have to be taken to certified, EPA following sites that deal with the cleanup of those materials. With that in mind, is that soil that's sitting in piles, or the rocks that they're moving that are sitting there getting rained on, causing additional issues to water sources that we're maybe neglecting to see as a continuation of the issue from the original crash?
Excellent question, man. So thank you for that. So there's a lot to unpack with what you said. So let's start from the beginning. You asked about the reestablishment of the train tracks. That's pretty. That happens.
Absolutely.
Work a lot of derailments. They reestablish the tracks, then they work on the remediation. Right. Get all the cargo moving and clear it up. We knew that there was significant contamination beneath the tracks. And so part of the order that we established with the company was to remove those tracks, dig up contamination, dig it down to the clay layer, which is the barrier between groundwater and the contamination. Verify that clay beneath the previously contaminated soil is clean before it gets back. And that's what's happening right now. The answer to your question on piles, yes, there were several waste piles on site. Those piles have been lined with a geotech liner and plastic, and they are actually currently covered right now. We paused operations to reevaluate some of our analytical needs to make sure that the community in the immediate area of the work zone is safe. So the removal of soils is going to continue again this afternoon. Shipment is going to continue again this afternoon. The piles, when they're not being excavated, either had to get a foam, non-chlorinated foam covering to suppress vapors, and or are covered. Now the soil right now is, it's pretty moist. You don't have dust issues in the community right now, but that's a great question about do we have runoff issues? And the answer is no. The piles are configured so that rainwater can be collected if it generates on site. Great. So we're okay on all fronts, and we're overseeing that operation 100%.
Thank you for explaining.
Then I would just add what Mark said. Ohio EPA has been out and observing waste management practices throughout. So we go out and inspect those areas. We're working with the U.S. EPA on that, but we go out and inspect them and an issue. It's brought up and it's resolved right away. As you can imagine, plastic has not work. Sometimes does boil around, so we go out multiple times a day in terms of ensure that everything is taken care of to continue to be protective. And the monitoring well installation that is occurring near the tracks, those, we have been out, we've overseen the installation of those, and they have some of them done. Of course, some of them can't be installed right now because they would be destroyed during the excavation of the tracks. So we have some in, they've been developed. I believe they're going to be sampling those, if not before, early next week. And so that will tell us whether or not right in kind of that worst zone, if groundwater was impacted. I can tell you that what we have seen is we're sealing off the top area, of course, because we don't want to create an opportunity. You talked about leaching. But if there's not leaching, we don't want to create a direct pathway down, right? So we're super careful out there observing how those wells are being installed to make sure we don't create a pathway. But what we have seen is we're down 50 to 70 feet through that pretty competent clay layer between where the contaminants we're seeing and actual groundwater out there. So we'll have more data on that, these issues, as well as next week.
As a side note, you two answered that question far better than today in the Senate committee hearing, so good job on you. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Could I bring up something that came up in a meeting Dr. Patterson mentioned? We had a previous meeting a few days ago, and someone brought up a question about stored feedstuffs, and I don't think we've talked about that. We're talking about newly planted, we're talking about cover crops, but there was apparently some question raised. I don't remember precisely what the character of the question was, but I think it was a dairyman. He had stored silage in bunker silos covered with plastic. He had sleeved, I guess, large bales, I don't know, round squares, whatever, but sleeved bales with plastic. Maybe that's an area we need to put down on a list of things to look at, is the ability to test stored feedstuffs. Yeah, all this other stuff is extremely important, exceedingly important, but there's a guy with hundreds of tons of silage, probably corn-based, and as we're testing things, we probably ought to be able to test that as well.
Yeah, thank you for that, and I would agree to that. A couple of good things. We talked about how plastic is used with the soil contamination. As we used to have a bunker silo, and we covered with plastic, and the good thing is that plastic to me, and this is just me saying, but it's a good barrier, and as we use wrap bales. But I would add to your question as far as at my farm, they're not wrapped, and I'm sure there's farms here that are not wrapped bales. They're more exposed, and also as you look at some, I don't know if anybody uses these practices, but some silage is covered with you put seed on it and you basically grow wheat, that is the sealant that is used to keep that silage intact and throughout the winter months. So I think a couple of those scenarios, I would agree with you, those questions we've been asking, but I think those are priorities as well.
Just something I think will be added to the list, that's all.
Yeah, I appreciate that, and I agree with that. It's already on the list, it's been talked about. Back to the plastics, I guess, as you talk about using the plastics to cover the soils, and you're using liners with soils, I kind of put that in my mind, that in place with the silage and the round beds.
Well, even barns that have square bills are going to have pretty good ventilation, so you could see something happen to get in there.
Yes, sir.
I guess if you have a list of the compounds you're testing for, I would propose we consider reversing the order, not to interrupt your soil testing, but reversing the order and doing it for the products that are closest to the consumer. So we're going to test the milk, we're going to test the grains that are going out, we're going to test the meat, whatever, because you know what compounds you're looking for. Let's test the ones that are closest to consumer, and if we can show them these compounds are not in there, to me that will give the consumer the most confidence. Because I don't think the consumer cares a lick about what the soil tests say. A lot of people in this room do, because they understand how it's going to go down the path of time. But for the consumer and these people that are making their living, getting their checks from the consumer, that might make more sense.
Yeah, so that's exactly what we're doing right now. We're taking the list of compounds that we know that are as a result of the derailment and getting that list into the hands of the food experts and the plant experts so that they can develop those tests if they don't already exist to answer those questions. Because you're exactly right. The number one thing we want to do with these tests is to fight off that misinformation that you were talking about previously, to give you the tools necessary to bring your businesses back to normal.
But I will say that from Unity to East Palestine to Negley, everybody and their brother wants an independent test of their soil. It's almost like everybody feels like they're owed their own little plot of soil to be tested. And I almost feel like that's what people are asking for, and I know that's unrealistic.
I'm glad you said that, because I neglected to state that. It was implied that when I gave you my report on the soil testing. But, yeah, we are, we're doing a more broad.
It's spread out.
Yeah, and so we're not going to be sampling every property.
So that will calm some people down though, to see that you are doing a large area there. It is going to cover a lot, but like, we've got to realize that it can't be, each individual house or, it can't, I get it. It has to, you have to like narrow it down.
So I know you said there was a list of places that could do the samples, but the dioxins were evidently pretty hard to sample for.
They take more time. So when you say 7 to 12 days, we'll probably get the semi-volatile organic data back first, which again, that's a good indicator. I mean, that's important. But the dioxin data takes a little longer. There are less labs that can do it. So yes,
But can we get a list of the labs that can do it? So if we wanted to do our own, we could send it
Yeah,
in?
Well, the lab list that you were referencing earlier.
Well, I know Haley had a list, but a lot of them couldn't do it, the dioxins. They could do some of the other stuff, but some of them wouldn't do dioxins.
That's a technical plus.
I guess, following with that question, and just bringing it back around to a statement that was made earlier, it was mentioned once or twice that OSU doesn't have the capacity to do these tests as quickly, I think, as we want them to be done. Are we partnering with Penn State University to try to double that capacity? Are we looking outside of the immediate area as an attempt to speed this along?
So from the standpoint, like I said, we've been communicating early on, we started communicating with our folks right across the border in Pennsylvania, the Secretary, and they're building those relationships and talking about their plans. I know I said earlier that, yeah, there's a state line there if you look at the map, but we know in our communities that that line is not there. But they are working with their folks over there as well. A little bit different relationship, and I'm not going to speak to them as far as what they're, what that looks like and what they're doing. So yeah, I know that the gentleman, Adam Ward, who is with Ohio State, has been communicating with, I think, both Penn State and University of Pennsylvania. So that collaboration is being discussed at the educational level. So.
Yeah, Danielle, and constant conversation with that as well. Those conversations are working on. We've got our scientists, such as Dr. Hattie here, as well as from UPenn and Penn State. Those conversations are happening on a very constant basis. So as soon as that information is to where we can actually have something solid and handed out, it'll be kind of that collaborative effort between OSU and State.
Danielle, I'd just like to say from an analytical perspective, it's not that Ohio State doesn't have the capacity to analyze those products or the compounds, but we do it on a research basis, so it's kind of like as a research project comes in, and so we don't have the ability to get samples in and have them turned around in 7 days because it's time sensitive. Does that make sense? And that takes a lot of infrastructure, and you've got to have a good number of samples coming through to keep that operation going. And so that's why when I say we don't have the capacity, it's not that we can't do the test, and Penn State may have a different setup, but internally we don't have the setup to do these on what we would call a routine basis, like you would expect your routine soil sample to go through, if that makes sense.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So does that suggest maybe to you, Mr. Baldridge, that there might be some need to boost their capacity for the foreseeable future? So we can process these things in a manner that makes these farmers more confident?
And I guess to that point, I mean, we talked about it internally at ODA, and I'm sure Ohio State, I mean, to build that out, that's not a flip of a switch, is my understanding.
Yeah, sure.
So I think we would probably, by the time we got to build out, we would probably be so far behind. And that's why I think the key is making sure that we have the testing specs that we want to go with and all that conversation. The private sector at this point, I mean, they're the ones to the point. So getting that quick turnaround, that's what we want.
Great.
So we talked about it internally. Where do we go as ag with our labs that we have? And I'm sure Ohio State had the same conversation. And Doctor, I appreciate you explaining that better to understand. It's not that you can't and so forth, but it's just not set up.
Yeah, and I think I asked the question just as a way to re-incentivize that it's important to go to the private sector in this situation and not rely on some of those entities that just can't work as quickly as we need them to work for the confidence that we need for our consumers.
Just a time-sensitive issue.
Yeah, I would add, just based on all the questions we've had here, right, there's so many different products that we're looking to have tested, and labs operate best on uniformity and consistency. So you have a line dedicated to, say, corn testing, right? They can't do a corn test and follow it over the milk test and follow it over the beef test. We're looking for the labs that are the best at what they do, that can provide us the results as fast as they can give to us. Thank you.
So now let's look down the road a few weeks. We find nothing. That's the hope. Let me throw out a suggestion that when it comes time, as we share this information, that we do so with a unified voice, that it's EPA, Ohio EPA, ODA, Pennsylvania, FSA, all of us at once with the same message. Otherwise, it will get lost and perhaps be misinterpreted. But if we all stand together, there's that communication release, I think it would be, and I don't know how we coordinate that yet, that's beyond my pay grade, but I think it would be valuable to speak as one voice.
Agreed. Yeah. Thank you, Commissioner. Thank you for being here. I just wanted to give you the opportunity. I really appreciate you being here as well with our local EMA.
Well, one thing I do want our county to know, we have been talking to Pete and Haley from, 3 weeks ago?
The next day after when we
Yeah,
started
getting this thing
calling.
moving. So, from the county standpoint, from the Board of Commissioners, our EMA, we got your back. Not your wallet.
And I think that's a good lead-in, and I'll kind of bring, if there's any other questions, I won't miss anybody. But, I'll kind of bring it to a close. And I want you to know, as far as the team at Department of Agriculture, in collaboration with our partners, I keep saying that. These are the folks that are home with you. These are the folks that are in your community. These are the folks that I would listen to and work with, because, hey, my office is in Columbus. These folks, their office is right here in your community. These are your ag folks that are represented. So that's why they're here. That's why we're working with them. And I appreciate that wholeheartedly. But know that the Department of Agriculture, we've heard you. We are listening. We are working on these issues. We are trying to make sure that we are thinking even more ahead than what you are. We're trying to really push ourselves to think about that next question as we move forward. It's we're in this together as far as the ag community. Like I said, I'm a farmer at heart, and so know that we're there. We're doing everything we can from that standpoint to help you folks. And it's about the agricultural economy in this area as we move past it. So I want to say thank you for everybody who's here.
Thank you.
I appreciate it very much, and we will continue to be in contact, with the local partners, and we will continue to work on this together. So thank you, everybody. I appreciate it. Thanks again. Take care.